Four shivering Labrador Retriever puppies, abandoned on a desolate Ohio road, hold the key to a chilling conspiracy when Officer Daniel uncovers a deadly secret that puts his life, and theirs, in the crosshairs. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe our channel Pause Verve. If this story touches your heart, please like the video and share it with others. The rain fell in thin, relentless curtains over the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio, turning the cracked asphalt of old Route 37 into a glistening ribbon under the pale glow of streetlights. It was well past midnight on a chilly Thursday in late October, the kind of night where the world seemed to hold its breath, save for the soft patter of rain and the occasional whisper of tires slicing through puddles. Officer Daniel Harper, a 48-year-old veteran of the Columbus Police Department, sat behind the wheel of his cruiser, the heater humming softly against the damp cold that seeped through his department-issued jacket. His lean frame, etched with the weight of years and loss, slumped slightly in the seat, his hazel eyes scanning the road with a practiced vigilance that never quite dulled, even on quiet nights like this. Daniel was a man who wore his solitude like a second uniform, one stitched together by the death of his wife Emily 6 years prior. Her absence lingered in the lines around his eyes, in the salt and pepper stubble that dusted his jaw, and in the way he gripped the steering wheel just a little too tightly, as if holding on to something that might slip away. His life had settled into a rhythm of routine. Coffee at dawn, patrol by 6, reports by afternoon, and night shifts he volunteered for, not for the overtime, but for the silence they offered. Home was a small craftsman-style house on a quiet street, its sage-green paint peeling at the edges, its porch sagging under the weight of memory. Inside, the walls held framed photos of better days, Emily laughing on a beach, Daniel in his dress Blues, their old dog, a scruffy mutt named Boomer sprawled on a picnic blanket. But the house was empty now, save for the faint scent of coffee and the creak of floorboards under his boots. Tonight, the radio in his cruiser crackled with the usual updates from dispatch, a voice he barely registered as he navigated the two-lane road winding just beyond the city's limits. The area was desolate, flanked by overgrown fields and skeletal trees that swayed in the wet wind. Daniel adjusted his collar, the cold biting deeper than usual, and let his thoughts drift to the thermos of black coffee waiting in the passenger seat. He wasn't expecting trouble. Most nights out here were uneventful, the kind of shifts where the biggest challenge was staying awake. But as his headlights swept across a curve in the road, they caught on something odd, a boxy shape half hidden in the roadside brush, its edges softened by the rain. He slowed the cruiser, squinting through the windshield. A cardboard box, sagging under the weight of water, sat abandoned on the gravel shoulder. It was out of place, too deliberate for litter, too exposed for someone's forgotten trash. Daniel's gut tightened, that old cop instinct stirring, the one that had kept him sharp through years of patrolling Cincinnati's rougher corners before he transferred here. He flicked on his hazard lights, pulled over, and stepped out into the rain, the drops stinging his face as they slid beneath his collar. His boots crunched on wet gravel as he approached, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The box was a mess, its flaps collapsed inward, the cardboard dark and heavy with water. At first, he saw nothing but shadows inside. The sea, beam reflecting off the wet surface, then a faint movement, a twitch, a glint of something alive. Daniel froze as a pair of eyes blinked back at him, small and glassy, followed by another, and another, and another. His breath caught. Inside the box, huddled in a trembling pile, were 4 Labrador Retriever puppies, no more than a month old. Their fur, golden, chocolate, and black, was matted and soaked, their ribs stark beneath their thin coats. They shivered violently, pressed together for warmth, their eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. The smallest, a golden-coated pup with a faint white patch on its chest, lay curled at the edge, its tiny flank rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. It was barely alive, its body so frail it seemed a gust of wind might snuff it out. Daniel knelt, heedless of the mud soaking through his uniform pants, and reached into the box. The cold bit at his fingers as he gently lifted the smallest pup, its body limp and weightless in his palm. A weak whimper escaped it, a sound so faint it pierced the rain like a needle. The others stirred, their heads lifting slightly, too weak to do more than watch. Daniel's chest tightened, a mix of anger and something softer, something he hadn't felt in years, swelling inside him. He looked around. No lights, no cars, no footprints in the mud. Whoever had left these puppies here had done so with cruel intent, certain no one would find them in this forgotten stretch of nowhere. He stood, cradling the golden pup against his chest, and carefully gathered the others, one by one, into his arms. A chocolate-coated pup with bold, curious eyes nuzzled weakly into his sleeve. A black one with a curious tilt to its head licked his thumb. The fourth, a yellow lab with a gentle gaze, pressed close to its siblings. Back at the cruiser, Daniel opened the passenger door and laid his jacket across the seat, creating a makeshift nest. He placed the puppies inside, their small bodies sinking into the fabric. The golden one, the weakest, whimpered again, and Daniel's jaw clenched. He slid behind the wheel, the rain drumming on the roof, and gripped the steering wheel hard. He didn't curse, didn't speak, just drove, his mind racing. He knew this would cost him. The dash cam was rolling, capturing every second of this unauthorized stop, this deviation from his route. Captain Nathan Wells, his superior, was a stickler for rules, a man who saw compassion as a liability. But as Daniel glanced at the puppies, their trembling forms barely visible in the dim light, he knew he'd face whatever came. These creatures, small and broken as they were, had already claimed a piece of him. The road stretched ahead, rain-slick and endless, but for the first time in years, the silence in Daniel's cruiser felt different, not heavy, not empty, but alive with the faint, fragile breaths of four souls he'd refused to leave behind. The rain had softened to a drizzle by the time Officer Daniel Harper pulled into the driveway of his modest craftsman home in Columbus, Ohio. The cruiser's headlights cast long shadows across the sage-green siding, illuminating the chipped paint and the sagging porch that hadn't seen repairs since Emily's passing. The clock on the dash read 1:17 a.m., and the neighborhood was still, save for the faint hum of a streetlight flickering down the block. Daniel cut the engine, his hands lingering on the wheel as he glanced at the passenger seat. 4 Labrador Retriever puppies lay nestled in his jacket, their tiny bodies still trembling but calmer now, warmed by the cruiser's heater. The smallest, the golden-coated one he'd instinctively called Sunny, stirred faintly, its eyes half open, glinting with a fragile will to survive. Daniel stepped out into the cool night air, the damp chill clinging to his uniform. He opened the passenger door and carefully gathered the puppies, wrapping the jacket tighter around them to shield their frail forms from the breeze. Their weight was barely noticeable, yet each small heartbeat pressed against his chest, a quiet reminder of the responsibility he'd taken on. Inside, the house was dim and silent, the air carrying the faint scent of old wood and the coffee he'd brewed that morning. The living room, with its worn recliner and a coffee table cluttered with case files, felt too large for one man, but suddenly too small for the life he'd just brought in. He knelt by the heating vent in the corner, where a faded throw rug lay, and gently placed the puppies on a folded blanket he pulled from a nearby chair. They huddled together instinctively, their matted fur stark against the soft grey fabric. Sunny, the weakest, curled tightly against the chocolate-coated pup, whose bold eyes darted around the unfamiliar space. The black pup shifted closer, licking Sunny's ear, while the yellow one let out a soft whine, its gaze fixed on Daniel as if seeking reassurance. He adjusted the thermostat, the faint click of the heater kicking on a small comfort in the stillness. His hands, calloused from years of gripping a steering wheel and a sidearm, moved with a tenderness he hadn't known he still possessed. Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number he knew by heart. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a veterinarian, who'd been a friend since his early days on the force, answered on the second ring. Her voice, warm but laced with the grogginess of being woken, cut through the line. "Daniel, it's past 1. Everything okay?" "I need you at my place," he said, his voice low but steady. "Found some puppies on patrol. They're in bad shape. One's barely hanging on." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Give me 15 minutes." The line went quiet, and Daniel sat back on his heels watching the puppies. The sight of them, so small, so vulnerable, stirred something deep, a mix of protectiveness and a quiet rage at whoever had left them to die. He thought of Emily, how she'd always had a soft spot for strays, how she'd nursed a half-starved kitten back to health during their first year of marriage. The memory ached, but it also anchored him, giving him a reason to keep moving. True to her word, Sarah arrived in under 15 minutes, her silver SUV pulling up with a soft crunch of gravel. She stepped onto the porch, her curly auburn hair pulled into a messy bun, her raincoat thrown over scrubs that suggested she'd been at the clinic late. At 52, Sarah carried herself with a quiet strength, her warm brown eyes sharp with focus despite the hour. She carried a medical bag under one arm, its leather worn from years of house calls. Daniel opened the door and she stepped inside, her gaze immediately falling on the puppies. "My God," she murmured, kneeling beside them, "what kind of monster does this?" Her hands, steady and gentle, moved over the puppies, assessing their condition. She checked their gums, their eyes, their bellies, her brow furrowing as she worked. "Dehydrated, malnourished, hypothermic," she said, her voice tight. "No collars, no tags, just dumped like garbage." Daniel stood nearby, arms crossed, the mud on his boots drying into faint smears on the hardwood floor. "Can you save them?" he asked, his voice betraying a flicker of hope he hadn't meant to reveal. Sarah glanced up, her eyes softening. "They've got a chance, but it's going to be a fight, especially for this one." She gestured to Sonny, whose breathing was still shallow, his tiny body shivering despite the warmth of the blanket. She pulled a heat pack from her bag, activated it, and tucked it carefully near Sonny's belly, murmuring soft reassurances. As she worked, the other puppies, chocolate, black and yellow, shifted closer, as if sensing their siblings' fragility. Daniel watched, his jaw tight. "I want them here," he said, the words coming out before he could second-guess them. "At least for tonight." Sarah paused, her hand still on Sonny. "You know this'll get you in trouble," she said, not unkindly. "So your captain's not exactly the warm and fuzzy type." "Let him try," Daniel replied, his tone firm but quiet. "They're not going anywhere else." Sarah's lips curved into a faint smile, the kind that said she knew him better than he sometimes knew himself. She returned to her work, setting up a small IV drip for Sonny and mixing a formula for the others. Daniel helped where he could, holding the puppies steady as Sarah administered fluids, his hands learning the delicate weight of their trust. The room filled with small sounds, the rustle of medical supplies, the soft whines of the puppies, the steady hum of the heater. For the first time in years, Daniel's home felt alive, not with the ghosts of the past, but with the fragile promise of something new. As Sarah packed up her bag, she looked at Daniel, her expression a mix of exhaustion and warmth. "I'll be back in the morning," she said. "Keep them warm, keep them fed, and Daniel, don't do anything stupid before I get here." He nodded, a rare half-smile tugging at his lips. "No promises." She shook her head, chuckling softly, and stepped back into the night. Daniel locked the door behind her and sat on the floor beside the puppies, his back against the wall. Sonny's breathing had steadied slightly, and the others dozed, their small bodies pressed together. He reached out, letting the black pup nuzzle his fingers, and felt a quiet resolve settle over him. Whatever came next, reprimands, questions, or worse, he'd face it. These puppies, abandoned and forgotten, had found him, and he wasn't letting go. The morning sun broke through the haze over Columbus, Ohio, casting a pale golden light across the city's working-class neighborhoods. Inside Daniel Harper's craftsman home, the air was warm with the scent of fresh coffee and the soft hum of the heater, where 4 Labrador Retriever puppies lay curled on their blanket by the vent. Sonny, the smallest, was still fragile, his golden coat dull, but his breathing steadier after Dr. Sarah Mitchell's care. The chocolate pup, bold and alert, sniffed the edges of the blanket, while the black and yellow ones dozed, their oversized paws twitching in sleep. Daniel stood in the kitchen, his uniform rumpled from the night before, a mug of black coffee cooling in his hand. His hazel eyes, shadowed by fatigue, lingered on the puppies, a faint warmth stirring in his chest despite the weight of what he knew was coming. At 48, Daniel was no stranger to the chain of command, nor to the consequences of bending its rules. His 20 years on the force had taught him that compassion often came with a price, especially under the scrutiny of Captain Nathan Wells, a man whose ambition outstripped his empathy. Daniel's dashcam had recorded every second of his unscheduled stop on Old Route 37. The moment he'd found the puppies, the deviation from his patrol route, the decision to bring them home. He knew Nathan would see it as a liability, a crack in the precinct's carefully polished image. But as he watched Sonny shift closer to his siblings, Daniel felt no regret, only a quiet resolve that had been missing from his life for too long. The call came at 7:42 a.m., sharp and expected. Dispatch relayed Nathan's order. Report to the precinct immediately. Daniel changed into a fresh uniform, the fabric crisp against his skin, and checked on the puppies one last time. He refilled their water bowl and adjusted the heat pack near Sonny, his fingers brushing the pup's soft fur. "Hold tight," he murmured, his voice low. He locked the door behind him and drove to the precinct, the city waking around him, school, buses rumbling, delivery trucks idling, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. The Columbus Police Department's headquarters was a squat, modern building of glass and brick, its lobby buzzing with the hum of phones and the shuffle of officers. Daniel stepped inside, his boots echoing on the polished floor, and made his way to Nathan's office on the second floor. The captain's door was open, and Nathan sat behind his desk, his grey hair slicked back, his barrel-chested frame filling out a pristine uniform. At 54, Nathan was a careerist through and through, his mustache neatly trimmed, his eyes sharp with the kind of calculation that thrived on control. A flat-screen monitor on his desk displayed a paused image from Daniel's dashcam, the soggy cardboard box illuminated by headlights, Daniel kneeling in the mud. "Close the door," Nathan said, his voice clipped, not looking up from the paperwork, in front of him. Daniel complied, standing at ease, his hands clasped behind his back. The air in the room was heavy, charged with the unspoken tension that had simmered between them since Daniel transferred to Columbus 3 years ago. Nathan had wanted a by-the-book officer. Daniel, with his quiet defiance and tendency to follow, his gut, was anything but. Nathan leaned back, tapping a pen against the desk. "Caught on camera, Harper. Unscheduled stop, unauthorized detour, bringing animals into city property. What the hell were you thinking?" His mustache twitched, a telltale sign of irritation. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I was thinking they'd be dead if I hadn't stopped. 4 puppies, abandoned, one barely breathing. I made a call." Nathan's eyes narrowed. "A call that breaks protocol. You're not a rookie, Harper. You know the rules. Dash cams. Always rolling, every move's accountable. You think this department's a pet shelter? They were left to die," Daniel said, his tone firm but calm. "No tags, no tracks, just a box on a back road. Someone wanted them gone. I wasn't going to let that happen." Nathan tossed the pen down, leaning forward. "You're a good cop, Daniel, but this bleeding heart routine is a liability. You brought those animals into your cruiser, your home, city property, your responsibility. If one of those dogs bites someone, or if this gets out to the press, it's my ass on the line, not just yours." Daniel met his gaze, unflinching. "Then write me up. Suspend me if you have to. But those puppies are alive because I stopped. That's not a mistake." The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the precinct beyond the door. Nathan's discomfort was palpable, not just anger but something else, a flicker of unease, as if Daniel's act of kindness had tugged at a thread he'd rather keep buried. Nathan leaned back, his fingers drumming on the desk. "You're off field duty." "Until I say otherwise," he said finally. "Desk work pending review, and those dogs? They're your problem, not the department's. Don't let this happen again." Daniel nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Understood." He turned to leave, but Nathan's voice stopped him. "And Harper," Nathan added, his tone colder now. "Don't go playing hero. You're on thin ice." Daniel didn't respond. He stepped into the hallway, the weight of the reprimand settling over him like the damp chill of the night before. He knew Nathan's type, men who saw rules as shields, not tools, and who viewed compassion as weakness. But as he walked back to his cruiser, the image of the puppies, Sonny's faint whimper, the others' trusting eyes, burned in his mind. Thin ice or not, he'd made his choice. Back home, Daniel found the puppies stirring, their small movements a stark contrast to the sterile tension of the precinct. Sonny had managed to lift his head, his nose nudging the chocolate pup, who was already sniffing the edges of the blanket with newfound energy. Daniel crouched beside them, his hand resting lightly on the yellow pup's back. Nathan's words echoed, but they couldn't drown out the quiet strength he felt in this moment. Something about these puppies, their survival against the odds, felt bigger than a reprimand. It felt like a beginning. The late morning light filtered through the blinds of Daniel Harper's Craftsman home in Columbus, Ohio, casting soft stripes across the hardwood floor, where 4 Labrador Retriever puppies lay on their blanket by the heater. The rain had cleared, leaving a crisp autumn stillness outside, the kind that made the world feel new if only for a moment. Inside, the air was warm, tinged with the scent of puppy formula and the coffee Daniel had brewed but barely touched. His reprimand from Captain Nathan Wells still hung over him like a storm cloud. But here, in the quiet of his living room, the weight felt lighter, softened by the sight of the puppies beginning to stir. Sonny, the golden-coated pup who'd been closest to death, was stronger now, his tiny chest rising with more confidence, though his movements were still wobbly. The chocolate pup, bold and curious, pawed at the edge of the blanket, while the black one yawned, revealing a pink tongue that curled with sleepy defiance. The yellow pup, with her gentle, watchful eyes, lay close to Sonny, as if guarding him. Daniel, still in his uniform but with the tie loosened, sat on the floor nearby, his back against the recliner. His hands, rough from years of police work, rested on his knees, but his gaze was fixed on the puppies, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. For the first time in years, his home didn't feel like a museum of loss, but a place where life was taking root. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had stopped by earlier, her auburn hair tucked under a knit cap, her medical bag slung over her shoulder. She'd checked the puppies, her hands moving with practiced care as she adjusted Sonny's IV drip and fed the others a soft formula. "They're fighters," she'd said, her warm brown eyes meeting Daniel's, especially this one. She'd nodded at Sonny, who'd managed a faint tail wag. Before leaving for her clinic, she'd left strict instructions: keep them warm, feed them every few hours, and call if anything changed. Daniel had nodded, the weight of her trust settling comfortably in his chest. Now, as the clock ticked toward noon, Daniel set about making the space safer for the puppies. He moved a stack of case files from the coffee table, pushed the recliner against the wall, and laid out fresh towels near the heater. It felt strange, almost like preparing a nursery, a task he and Emily had never had the chance to undertake. The thought brought a pang, but it was softer than usual, tempered by the puppy's presence. He named them quietly, the names coming as naturally as breath. The chocolate pup with his fearless energy was Max. The black one, curious and quick, was Luna. The yellow one, calm and observant, was Willow. And Sonny, the smallest, carried the hope of a new dawn. A soft knock at the door broke his thoughts. Daniel stood brushing dog hair from his pants and opened it to find Jamie Carter, a 13-year-old neighbor who delivered newspapers on his battered red bicycle. Jamie was slight, with dark curly hair and clothes that hung loose on his frame, his sneakers scuffed from too many miles. His brown eyes held a quiet caution, the kind born of a life where trust was earned, not given. He clutched a stack of misdelivered mail, his cheeks flushed from the ride. "Hey, Officer Harper," he said, holding out the letters. "These were in our box by mistake." Daniel took them with a nod. "Thanks, Jamie. You're Mrs. Carter's grandson, right?" "Yeah," Jamie said, shifting his weight. His gaze drifted past Daniel, catching on the puppies huddled by the heater. His face lit up, the caution melting away. "Are those dogs?" "Sort of," Daniel said, stepping aside. "Found them last night on patrol. Want to see?" Jamie's eyes widened, and he nodded eagerly, stepping inside like he'd been invited into a secret world. He knelt by the puppies, his hands hovering until Daniel gave a gentle nod. Luna, the black pup, sniffed his fingers, her tail giving a tentative wag. Jamie's smile grew, a rare, unguarded thing. "They're so small," he whispered, as Luna licked his hand. Max bounded over, nearly tripping on his own paws, and Jamie laughed, the sound bright in the quiet room. "They're getting stronger," Daniel said, leaning against the wall. He watched Jamie, noting the way the boy's shoulders relaxed, the nervous edge in his voice fading. He'd seen Jamie around the neighborhood, always alone, often dodging older kids who taunted him at the park. The boy's life, from what Daniel knew, wasn't easy. His grandmother, Mrs. Carter, worked long hours at a diner, leaving Jamie to fend for himself more than a kid should. "Can I come back and see them again?" Jamie asked, his eyes still on Luna, who'd curled against his knee. "As long as your grandma's okay with it," Daniel said. "They could use a friend." Jamie's face lit up. "She'll be fine. She says I spend too much time reading comics anyway." He hesitated, then added, "I've never had a pet. Grandma says they're too much money." Daniel nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. "You can help me look after them if you want. They'll need someone to keep them out of trouble." "Really?" Jamie's voice was soft, almost disbelieving. "Really?" Daniel said, and the boy's grin was answer enough. As Jamie left, promising to return after school, Daniel sat back by the puppies. Max chewed on the corner of a towel while Willow watched him with a patient air. Sonny stirred, his eyes meeting Daniel's, and for a moment the world felt smaller, simpler. The reprimand, Nathan's cold warnings, the desk duty looming, they faded against the warmth of this moment. These puppies, and now Jamie, had slipped into the cracks of his guarded life, filling spaces he hadn't realized were empty. But beneath the warmth, a faint unease lingered. The way the puppies had been abandoned, so deliberate, so cruel, it gnawed at him, a puzzle his cop instincts couldn't ignore. For now, though, he let himself sit in the quiet, the puppies' soft breaths a reminder that some fights were worth starting. The afternoon sun hung low over Columbus, Ohio, painting the neighborhood in hues of amber and gold. Inside Daniel Harper's craftsman home, the living room was a small haven of warmth, the heater humming steadily as 4 Labrador Retriever puppies explored their blanket by the vent. Sonny, the golden pup, was steadier now, his white-patched chest rising with cautious strength as he nibbled at a bowl of softened food Dr. Sarah Mitchell had left. Max, the chocolate lab, tumbled over his own paws, his bold energy sparking playful nips at Luna, the black pup, who retaliated with a mock growl. Willow, the yellow lab, sat quietly, her gentle eyes tracking their antics with a wisdom beyond her weeks. Daniel, still in his uniform, but with the jacket draped over a chair, knelt nearby, folding fresh towels to expand their makeshift pen. The reprimand from Captain Nathan Wells lingered in his mind, a sharp edge to the quiet peace of the moment, but the puppy's resilience dulled its sting. Daniel's thoughts were interrupted by a faint crinkle as he shook out the blanket they'd slept on. Something small and rough slid from its folds, landing on the hardwood floor with a soft thud. He paused, his cop instincts flaring, and picked it up, a torn scrap of fabric, no larger than a credit card, its edges frayed and stained with mud. The material was thick, like canvas, and bore a partial logo stitched in faded thread. The letters SF, in a blocky font, half of a circular emblem missing. Daniel turned it over in his calloused fingers, his brow furrowing. It wasn't household fabric or a piece of the cardboard box. It felt purposeful, like part of a uniform or equipment. His years on the force, especially in narcotics before, transferring to Columbus, had honed his sense for clues that didn't belong. This wasn't random debris, it was a thread to something bigger. He set the scrap on the coffee table, next to a stack of case files he hadn't touched since his suspension from field duty. The puppy's abandonment had already struck him. As deliberate, the box placed too far from any home, too exposed to be an accident. Now this fabric deepened his unease. SF could mean anything, initials, an acronym, but its presence in the box suggested a connection to an organization, perhaps security or law enforcement. Daniel's mind flashed to old cases, to private firms that supplied guard dogs or trained animals for less than legal operations. He'd seen it before in Cincinnati, contractors cutting corners, animals treated as tools, discarded when they became inconvenient. Daniel glanced at the puppies. Max had flopped onto his side, panting from his play, while Luna nosed at Sunny, who'd managed a tentative step toward the water bowl. Willow's gaze met Daniel's, steady and searching, as if she sensed his shift in focus. "You know something, don't you?" he murmured, half to himself. The thought was absurd. Puppies couldn't tell stories, but their fear that first night, the way Sunny had trembled beyond mere cold, felt like more than neglect. It felt like they'd seen something, or been part of it. He stood, his knees creaking, and moved to the kitchen, where he kept a small evidence kit from his field days, a habit he'd never shaken. He slipped the fabric into a plastic pouch, sealing it with care. Reporting it to the precinct wasn't an option, not yet. Nathan Wells had made it clear Daniel was on a leash, and with the dashcam footage already under scrutiny, any move through official channels could be twisted against him. Worse, if the fabric pointed to something bigger, someone at the precinct might want it buried. Nathan's discomfort during the reprimand, that flicker of unease, hadn't escaped Daniel. It was a gut feeling, but Daniel's gut had rarely steered him wrong. Sarah's words from the night before echoed, "You know this'll get you in trouble." She'd been right, but trouble was familiar territory. What wasn't familiar was the pull he felt towards these puppies, a need to protect them that went beyond duty. He returned to the living room, crouching beside the pen. Sunny had settled against Willow, his tiny frame dwarfed by her calm presence. Daniel reached in, letting Luna nuzzle his hand, her warmth grounding him. "We'll figure this out," he said softly, though whether to the puppies or himself, he wasn't sure. Outside, the neighborhood hummed with the rhythm of a Saturday afternoon, kids shouting in a nearby yard, the distant buzz of a lawnmower. Daniel's thoughts drifted to Jamie Carter, the newspaper boy who'd been so taken with the puppies. The kid's earnestness, his quiet awe, had stirred something in Daniel, a reminder of the boy he'd been before life hardened him. Jamie would be back soon, likely with more questions and that shy grin. The thought brought a faint smile, but it faded as Daniel's gaze returned to the evidence pouch on the table. The fabric was a clue, but it was also a warning. Whoever had left the puppies hadn't expected them to survive, let alone end up in the hands of a cop with a knack for asking questions. Daniel's suspension limited his access, but it didn't dull his instincts. He'd start with what he had: the logo, the puppy's condition, the desolate stretch of old Route 37. If SF was tied to a security outfit, or worse, someone with influence, he'd need to tread carefully. But careful didn't mean stopping. As the puppies dozed, their soft breaths filling the room, Daniel felt a shift inside him. The house, once a shrine to loss, was alive again. Not just with the puppies, but with purpose. Emily would have loved this, he thought, her face flashing in his mind, her laugh as clear as the day they'd found Boomer. The memory didn't hurt as much now. It felt like a guide, pointing him toward the fight ahead. The puppies weren't just survivors, they were witnesses, and Daniel was their voice. Whatever SF meant, whoever had tried to erase them, Daniel would find them. For Sunny, Max, Luna, Willow, and for the part of himself he was only beginning to rediscover. The evening sky over Columbus, Ohio, had turned a bruised shade of gray, low clouds gathering like a held breath. Inside Daniel Harper's craftsman home, the living room glowed softly, the heater casting warmth over the 4 Labrador Retriever puppies nestled on their blanket. Sunny, the golden pup, was stronger now, his white-patched chest rising steadily. As he dozed beside Willow, whose yellow coat gleamed under the lamplight, Max, the chocolate lab, chewed lazily on a knotted towel, while Luna, the black pup, paced the edge of the pen, her curious eyes darting toward the window. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, the scrap of fabric with the SF logo sealed in its evidence pouch before him, his coffee cold but untouched. The reprimand from Captain Nathan Wells and the suspicious clue had tightened a knot in his gut, but the puppy's quiet presence kept him grounded, their small lives a tether to something worth fighting for. The day had been uneventful, save for a brief visit from Jamie Carter, the 13-year-old newspaper boy who'd become a regular fixture. Jamie had spent an hour with the puppies, his shy grin widening as Luna tugged at his shoelaces and Max flopped into his lap. "They're going to be big," he'd said, his voice soft with awe, and Daniel had nodded, seeing in the boy a spark of hope that mirrored his own. Jamie had left just before dusk, promising to return tomorrow, his bicycle bell chiming as he pedaled down the street. Now, with night settling in, the house was quiet. The only sounds, the puppy's soft breaths and the faint creak of the old floorboards. Daniel's thoughts were on the SF logo, his mind sifting through memories of old cases, private security, firms, shady contractors, whispers of off-the-books operations. The fabric wasn't just a clue, it was a door to something darker, something tied to the puppy's deliberate abandonment. He'd planned to call Sarah Mitchell later to see if she could dig into veterinary records for any leads on the logo or the puppy's origins. But, as he reached for his phone, a sharp clatter broke the silence. A metallic scrape from the backyard like a trash can tipping over. Daniel froze, his cop instincts flaring. He stood, moving silently to the window and peered through the blinds. The backyard was dark, the oak tree's branches swaying in the evening breeze, but nothing moved in the shadows. It could have been a raccoon, or the wind knocking over. Something loose. Still, the hair on his neck prickled. He reached for the .45 holstered in the kitchen drawer, its weight familiar in his hand, and stepped toward the back door. The puppies stirred, Luna letting out a low, rumbling growl that was more warning than play. Willow's ears perked, her gentle eyes narrowing, and even Sonny lifted his head, sensing the shift. Daniel unlatched the door, his movements deliberate, and eased it open. The cool air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp grass and something sharper, like cigarette smoke. Before he could step outside, a figure lunged from the side, a blur of dark clothing and intent. A blunt object, maybe a pipe, swung toward his shoulder, but Daniel's reflexes kicked in. He ducked, the blow grazing his arm, and stumbled back, slamming into the doorframe. The attacker, tall and broad, loomed in the dim light, his face obscured by a hood. Daniel raised his gun, but Luna and Max, now alert, barreled through the open door, their small bodies surprisingly fierce. Luna's bark was sharp, and Max snapped at the man's ankle, catching the cuff of his pants. The attacker swore, his voice deep and rough with a Midwestern twang, and kicked out, shaking Max off. Daniel steadied himself, his arm throbbing, but his grip on the .45 firm. "Freeze!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the night. "Step back now!" The man hesitated, his posture tense, then bolted, limping slightly as he vanished into the shadows of the alley behind the house. Daniel didn't fire. There was no clear shot, and he wasn't about to risk a stray bullet in a residential neighborhood. He lowered the gun, his breath ragged, and knelt to check the puppies. Luna and Max were unharmed, their tails wagging despite the chaos, their bravery out of proportion to their size. Willow and Sonny watched from the doorway, their eyes wide but steady. Daniel closed the door, locking it tight, and sank onto the kitchen floor, the puppies clustering around him. His shoulder ached, a bruise already forming, but his mind was racing. The attack wasn't random. The man hadn't tried to steal anything, hadn't spoken beyond that curse. This was a warning, a message to back off. The SF fabric, the puppy's abandonment, Nathan's unease, it was all connected. And someone was watching, someone who knew Daniel wasn't letting this go. He grabbed his phone and called Sarah, his voice calm but urgent. "I need you here," he said when she answered. "Someone just tried to jump me at the house." "Puppies are fine, but I'm not taking chances." "I'm on my way," Sarah replied, her tone sharp with worry. "Don't move." As he waited, Daniel sat with the puppies, Luna curling against his side, Max still alert, sniffing the air. Sonny nuzzled his hand, a small gesture that steadied his pulse. The attack had shaken him, but it had also clarified something. Whoever was behind this thought the puppies were a loose end, a threat to be erased. But they hadn't counted on Daniel, or the bond forming in this quiet house. He thought of Jamie, too, and the boy's innocent connection to the puppies. If someone was watching the house, Jamie could be at risk, a thought that tightened Daniel's resolve. Sarah arrived within 20 minutes, her SUV pulling up quietly. She stepped inside, her auburn hair loose and damp from the mist, her medical bag swapped for a flashlight and a fierce expression. "You okay?" she asked, her eyes scanning him for injuries. Bruised, not broken, Daniel said, flexing his arm with a wince. He showed her the porch, the scuff marks in the dirt where the attacker had stood. He was waiting, knew I'd come out. Sarah's jaw tightened. This is about the puppies, isn't it? That fabric you found. Daniel nodded, handing her the evidence pouch. It's bigger than neglect. Someone's covering tracks, and they're not subtle about it. Sarah met his gaze, her voice firm. Then we dig deeper. But you need to be careful, Daniel. They're not just after you, they're after them. She nodded at the puppies who'd settled back on their blanket, their trust unshaken. Daniel looked at Sunny, Max, Luna, and Willow, their small forms a reminder of why he couldn't stop. The threat had made it personal, but it had also lit a fire. He wasn't alone. Sarah, Jamie, the puppies, they were in this together, and he'd protect them all, no matter what came next. The morning after the attack, a brittle autumn stillness settled over Columbus, Ohio, the air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves and frost. Inside Daniel Harper's craftsman home, the living room was a quiet sanctuary, the heater humming as 4 Labrador Retriever puppies lounged on their blanket. Sunny, the golden pup, was gaining strength, his white-patched chest rising with steady breaths as he nibbled at a soft treat. Max, the chocolate lab, sprawled across Luna, the black pup who swatted at him playfully, while Willow, the yellow lab, watched with her calm, knowing eyes. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, a fresh bruise darkening his shoulder, the evidence, pouch with the SF fabric scrap before him. The attack had left a mark, not just on his body but on his resolve. Whoever had come for him last night was tied to the puppy's abandonment, and Daniel was done waiting for answers to find him. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had stayed late, bandaging Daniel's shoulder and insisting he lock every door. Her auburn hair had been loose, her brown eyes fierce with a mix of worry and determination. Before leaving, she'd promised to dig into veterinary databases for any trace of the SF logo or similar cases of animal neglect. Now, as the morning sun filtered through the blinds, Daniel felt the weight of her words. This is bigger than neglect. The puppies weren't just victims, they were evidence, and someone was desperate to keep them silent. Daniel stood, his boots heavy on the hardwood floor, and checked on the puppies. Luna bounded over, her tail wagging, and he scratched her ears, a faint smile breaking through his focus. "You're trouble, you know that," he murmured. Max barked, as if in agreement, while Sunny and Willow watched, their trust a quiet anchor. The attack had clarified something. Whoever was behind this wasn't just careless, they were calculated, and Daniel's cop instincts screamed that the SF logo was the key. He decided to revisit the spot where he'd found the puppies, a stretch of old Route 37 that felt more like a crime scene now than a random roadside. With his field duty suspended, he couldn't use department resources, but he could still work the case on his own. He tucked the .45 into his holster, pulled on a plain jacket to avoid attention, and drove out. The puppies left safe in their pen with extra water, and a chew toy Max had already claimed. Old Route 37 was as desolate as it had been that rainy night, flanked by tangled brush and fields of dying grass. Daniel parked his civilian truck, a beat-up Ford he rarely used, and walked the shoulder, his eyes scanning for anything he'd missed. The spot where the cardboard box had sat was marked by a faint square of flattened gravel, but the rain had washed away any obvious tracks. He moved slowly, his flashlight cutting through the morning mist until something caught his eye, a glint of fabric snagged in a thicket of thorn bushes, half buried in the mud. Daniel crouched, pulling on a pair of gloves from his evidence kit. It was a weathered duffel bag, its canvas torn and stained, the zipper rusted shut. He tugged it free, thorns scratching his sleeves, and forced the zipper open. Inside was a grim collection, matted fur, a bloodied rag, and a cracked dog collar with a partial serial number etched into the metal. Tucked in a corner was another scrap of fabric, this one with the full SF logo, a stylized shield with the words Sentinel Force faintly visible. Daniel's jaw tightened. Sentinel Force was a name he vaguely recalled from his Cincinnati days, a private security firm shut down years ago after allegations of illegal animal use in drug raids. The collar and the blood suggested these puppies hadn't just been abandoned, they'd been discarded, likely after witnessing or enduring something violent. He sealed the items in evidence pouches, his mind racing. The collar's serial number could be a lead, but with Nathan Wells watching his every move, turning it over to the precinct was too risky. If Sentinel Force was involved, or someone connected to it, they had the means to bury evidence, and Daniel's career with it. He thought of Nathan's cold demeanor during the reprimand, the way his eyes had flickered with something beyond bureaucratic irritation. It was a long shot, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that Nathan knew more than he let on. Back home, Daniel laid the duffel's contents on the kitchen table, the puppy's playful yips a stark contrast to the grim evidence. Sonny had managed to stand, his wobbly legs carrying him a few steps before he flopped beside Willow, who licked his ear gently. Daniel watched them, a quiet rage simmering. These puppies had been through hell, yet here they were, fighting to live, trusting him to keep them safe. He wouldn't let them down. He called Sarah, his voice low. Found something on Route 37, a duffel with a collar, blood, and another SF logo. It's Sentinel Force, a defunct security outfit. Can you run the collar's serial number through your database? Sarah's reply was immediate. I'm on it. But Daniel, if this is Sentinel Force, you're poking a hornet's nest. Be careful. I know, he said, his gaze drifting to the puppies. But someone's scared enough to come after me. That means we're close. As he hung up, Jamie's bicycle bell chimed outside. The boy appeared at the door, his curly hair damp with sweat, his eyes wide with urgency. Officer Harper, he gasped, holding up his cracked phone. I was walking home from the park and I saw this guy by your fence. He was just standing there, watching. Daniel's pulse quickened. He took the phone, the screen showing a blurry photo of a tall man in a dark jacket. His face turned away, but his posture deliberate. Good work, Jamie, he said, his voice calm but firm. Go home, lock your doors, don't tell anyone about this yet. Jamie nodded, his fear tempered by pride, and pedaled off. Daniel studied the photo, the man's build eerily familiar. The attack, the duffel, Jamie's sighting. It was all closing in, a noose tightening around his quiet life. But as he looked at Sonny, Max, Luna, and Willow, their small forms sprawled in a pile of trust, he felt a fire ignite. This wasn't just about answers anymore. It was about justice for the puppies and for the part of himself he'd buried with Emily. He'd keep digging, no matter who stood in his way. The night air in Columbus, Ohio, carried a sharp bite, the kind that slipped under collars and settled into bones. Inside Daniel Harper's craftsman home, the living room was a pocket of warmth, the heater's soft hum blending with the gentle snores of 4 Labrador Retriever puppies curled on their blanket. Sonny, the golden pup, slept soundly, his white-patched chest rising with newfound strength. Max, the chocolate lab, sprawled across Luna, the black pup who twitched in a dream, while Willow, the yellow lab, lay sentinel, her calm eyes half open, watching the room. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, the evidence from the duffel bag spread before him, the bloodied rag, the cracked collar, the Sentinel Force fabric scrap. Jamie's blurry photo of the watcher by the fence lay beside it, a grainy warning that someone was closing in. The investigation had taken root, and with it, a growing sense that the puppy's survival had rattled a cage Daniel hadn't yet fully mapped. The clock ticked past 10 p.m., and the neighborhood was quiet, the only sound the distant bark of a dog down the street. Daniel's shoulder still ached from the previous night's attack, a bruise blooming purple beneath his flannel shirt. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had called earlier, confirming the collar's serial number traced to a batch issued to Sentinel Force, a private security firm shut down a decade ago for illegal animal use and suspected ties to narcotics trafficking. It's a lead, she'd said, her voice taut with caution. But it's dangerous. If they're active again, they've got friends in high places. Daniel had nodded into the phone, his gaze on the puppies, knowing danger was already at his door. He stood, stretching his stiff limbs, and checked the locks. Front door, back door, windows. A habit honed by years on the force and sharpened. By the watcher Jamie had spotted. The puppies stirred, Luna letting out a soft yip as she rolled onto her back. Daniel smiled faintly, their resilience a quiet fuel for his resolve. He was about to pour a glass of water when a faint creak came from the back porch, deliberate and human, not the wind or a stray animal. His pulse quickened, the memory of last night's ambush flashing sharp. Daniel moved silently to the kitchen drawer, retrieving his .45, its weight steadying his hand. The puppies sensed the shift, Max's ears perking, Willow rising to her feet. With a low growl, Sonny blinked awake, his frail form tensing while Luna padded to the door, her small frame bristling. Daniel eased toward the back door, his boots silent on the hardwood, and peered through the small window. The porch was dark, the oak tree's shadow swaying, but a faint glint, metal, maybe a tool, betrayed movement by the railing. He unlatched the door, his breath controlled, and pushed it open. The attack came fast, a figure lunging from the side, a blunt object swinging toward his chest. Daniel sidestepped, the blow clipping his already bruised shoulder, sending a jolt of pain down his arm. He stumbled, catching himself against the doorframe as the attacker, a tall man in a dark jacket, face shadowed by a hood, raised the weapon again. But Max and Luna, fueled by instinct, burst through the open door, their barks piercing the night. Max, bold and fearless, sank his teeth into the man's pant leg, while Luna darted in, nipping at his calf with surprising ferocity for her size. The man cursed, his voice low and gravelly, a Midwestern drawl laced with panic. "Damn mutts!" he spat, shaking his leg to dislodge Max. Daniel seized the moment, surging forward despite the pain, and slammed his shoulder into the attacker's chest, knocking him back. The man staggered, the pipe, or whatever it was, clattering to the porch. Daniel raised his .45, his voice a growl. "Freeze! Move and you're done!" The attacker hesitated, his breath ragged, then turned and sprinted, limping noticeably as he vanished into the alley's shadows. Daniel didn't fire. The risk of hitting a neighbor was too high, but his eyes tracked the man's uneven gait. A detail he filed away. He lowered the gun, his shoulder screaming, and knelt to check Max and Luna, who stood panting, tails wagging with a mix of pride and adrenaline. "Good kids," he murmured, running his hands over their fur, relieved to find no injuries. Willow and Sonny watched from the doorway, their eyes wide but unafraid, as if they'd known their siblings had it handled. Daniel secured the door, his heart still pounding, and sank onto the kitchen floor, the puppies clustering around him. Max nudged his hand, Luna licked his fingers, and Sonny, in a small act of triumph, crawled into his lap, his warmth a balm to the chaos. The attack wasn't about robbery or chance, it was targeted, a second attempt to scare him off or worse. The limping gait, the same build as Jamie's photo, the timing after finding the Sentinel Force evidence, it all pointed to someone desperate to keep the puppy's story buried. He called Sarah, his voice steady despite the pain. "Another attack," he said when she answered, her gasp audible. "Same guy, I think, limped away. I'm fine, puppies are fine, but this is escalating." "I'm coming over," Sarah said, her tone fierce, "and we're not waiting for them to come back." She arrived in minutes, her SUV screeching into the driveway. She stepped inside, her auburn hair loose, her scrubs swapped for jeans and a coat, her eyes blazing. She checked Daniel's shoulder, her hands gentle but firm, as she pressed a cold pack to the bruise. "How you're lucky it's not broken," she said, her voice tight. "This wasn't a warning, Daniel. They want you out of the picture." He nodded, showing her the porch, where scuff marks and a dropped screwdriver marked the struggle. "He didn't come to steal," he said. "He came to hurt me or to stop me digging." Sarah's eyes fell on the evidence pouch, the SF logo stark under the kitchen light. "Sentinel Force," she said, almost a whisper. "You've rattled them. The puppies, the collar, the blood. They're evidence of something they can't afford to let out." Daniel looked at the puppies, now settled back on their blanket, Max chewing Luna's ear, Willow guarding Sonny. "They didn't count on these guys surviving," he said, his voice low. "Or me." Sarah's hand brushed his, a fleeting gesture of solidarity. "We need a plan. You can't do this alone, not with Nathan breathing down your neck and whoever this is coming after you." Daniel met her gaze, the fire in her eyes mirroring his own. The attack had made it personal, but it had also forged a team. Him, Sarah, the puppies, even Jamie. The limping attacker, the Sentinel Force clues, the growing danger, they were pieces of a puzzle Daniel was determined to solve. For the puppies, for justice, and for the man he was rediscovering in their trust. The dawn light crept over Columbus, Ohio, pale and tentative, filtering through the blinds of Daniel Harper's Craftsman home. The living room was a quiet refuge, the heater's hum a steady backdrop to the soft snores of 4 Labrador Retriever puppies sprawled on their blanket. Sonny, the golden pup, was visibly stronger, his white-patched chest rising with confidence. As he nestled against Willow, the yellow lab, whose gentle eyes scanned the room, Max, the chocolate lab, lay on his back, paws in the air, while Luna, the black pup, chewed a corner of the blanket, her energy undimmed by the previous night's chaos. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, his shoulder stiff and bruised from the second attack, the evidence pouch with the Sentinel Force logo and the cracked collar before him, Jamie's blurry photo of the Watcher, a tall, limping figure in a dark jacket, sat beside it, a haunting reminder that the danger was closing in. The attack had left Daniel shaken but resolute. The limping assailant, the bloodied rag, the collar, tied to Sentinel Force. It all pointed to a conspiracy that went beyond animal cruelty. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had stayed until the early hours, her auburn hair pulled back, her hands steady as she'd cleaned his wounds, and urged him to take the fight to whoever was behind this. "They're scared," she'd said, her brown eyes fierce. "That means you're close." Now, as the morning unfolded, Daniel felt the weight of her words. The puppies weren't just survivors, they were witnesses, and someone powerful wanted them erased. Daniel sipped his coffee, the mug warm in his hands, and studied the evidence. The SF logo and the collar's serial number confirmed Sentinel Force, a defunct security firm with a dark history of using dogs in illegal operations. But the limping attacker, the deliberate targeting of his home, suggested the firm, or its remnants, hadn't vanished entirely. His suspension from field duty limited his access to police databases, but years on the force had taught him to trust his instincts, and his instincts screamed that the answer lay in his past. He stood, his boots heavy on the hardwood, and retrieved a box of old case files from the closet, relics from his Cincinnati days he'd never unpacked. The puppies stirred, Luna bounding over to sniff his ankles, her tail wagging. Daniel scratched her ears, a faint smile breaking through his focus. "You're gonna make me trip, kid," he murmured, stepping around her. Max barked, demanding attention, while Sonny and Willow watched, their trust a quiet anchor. The sight of them, thriving despite their ordeal, fueled his determination. He owed them answers. The files were a mix of faded reports and grainy photos, the paper yellowed, but the memories sharp. Daniel sifted through them, his fingers pausing on a misconduct report from 7 years ago, a case that had haunted him long after he'd left Cincinnati. It centered on Michael Vaughn, a narcotics officer with a charming smile and a temper that burned hot behind closed doors. Michael had been a rising star, broad-shouldered and smooth-talking, but whispers of illegal seizures and off-the-books deals had followed him. The report detailed allegations of his involvement with Sentinel Force, using their trained dogs to intimidate dealers and launder cash through shell companies. The investigation had collapsed. No hard evidence, no witnesses willing to talk, and Michael had been quietly discharged, never convicted. He'd vanished, leaving only rumors and a bad taste in Daniel's mouth. The kicker. Michael had been Captain Nathan Wells' partner in their early years, the two inseparable until Michael's fall. Nathan had distanced himself, climbing the E ranks while Michael faded, but Daniel had never bought Nathan's clean break. The unease in Nathan's eyes during the reprimand, the way he'd pushed to bury the puppy incident, it fit too neatly with Michael's shadow. Daniel pulled a photo from the file. Michael in uniform, cropped blonde hair, narrow eyes, a faint scar on his left cheek. He held it beside Jamie's blurry snapshot. The angle was poor, but the build, the posture, the hint of a limp, it was too close to dismiss. Daniel's pulse quickened. If Michael was back, working with or for Sentinel Force's remnants, the puppy's abandonment was no accident. They'd been bred for something, security, intimidation, maybe worse, and dumped when they became a liability. The attacks on Daniel were Michael's attempt to tie up loose ends, and Nathan's pressure suggested he was either complicit or protecting someone who was. Daniel sealed the photo and the report in a folder, his mind racing. He needed proof, something to link Michael to the duffel, the collar, and the attacks, but with Nathan watching, every move was a risk. Sarah arrived mid-morning, her SUV pulling up quietly. She stepped inside, her coat dusted with frost, her eyes tired but sharp. She carried a tablet, her veterinary database search results loaded. The collar's serial number matches a batch Sentinel force used for K9 units, she said, setting the tablet down. They were breeding dogs for high-risk ops, drug raids, private security. The blood on the rag, it's K9, likely. From one of the pup's littermates. Daniel showed her the misconduct report and Michael's photo. This guy, he said, tapping the image, Michael Vaughan, ex-cop, ex-Sentinel force, I think he's our limper. Sarah's brow furrowed as she studied the photo. Then Jamie's snapshot. It's him, isn't it? And Nathan knows more than he's saying, Daniel finished. I need to get to Michael before he tries again, but I can't go through. The precinct. Sarah nodded, her jaw tight. I'll keep digging, vet records, old contacts, but Daniel, if Michael's this bold, he's not working alone. Daniel looked at the puppies, Max now wrestling with Luna, Sonny taking wobbly steps toward Willow, who nuzzled him gently. The sight softened the edges of his fear. Michael, Nathan, Sentinel force, they'd underestimated these pups. And Daniel. He thought of Jamie, too, the boy's courage in snapping that photo, and Sarah's unwavering support. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was theirs, a small, fierce team bound by trust and purpose. He stood, tucking the folder away. I'll talk to Jamie, see if he saw anything else. Then we find where Michael's hiding. He's not getting near these pups again. Sarah's hand brushed his arm, a quiet promise. We'll get him, for them. As she left, Daniel knelt by the puppies, Luna climbing into his lap, her warmth a reminder of what was at stake. The connection to Michael, Vaughn was a breakthrough, but it was also a warning. The deeper Daniel dug, the more dangerous it would get. But with the puppies' eyes on him, their trust unshaken, he knew there was no turning back. The late afternoon sky over Columbus, Ohio, was a canvas of slate gray, heavy with the promise of rain. Inside Daniel Harper's craftsman home, the living room was a warm cocoon, the heater's hum mingling with the playful yips of 4 Labrador Retriever puppies. Sonny, the golden pup, scampered clumsily, his white-patched chest gleaming with new-found vigor. Max, the chocolate lab, wrestled with Luna, the black pup, their oversized paws tangling in the blanket, while Willow, the yellow lab, sat poised, her gentle eyes tracking their antics. Daniel stood at the kitchen table, the evidence laid out, like a map to a war he hadn't chosen, the Sentinel force fabric, the bloodied rag, the cracked collar, and the old case file on Michael Vaughan. Jamie's blurry photo of the limping watcher, a near-certain match to Michael, burned in his mind, as did the connection to Captain Nathan Wells. The attacks, the puppy's survival, the growing danger. It all pointed to a truth Daniel was ready to face head-on. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had called earlier, her voice taut with urgency. Using a GPS tag Daniel had discreetly placed on Max's collar for safety, she'd traced a location where the puppies had been held before their abandonment. An abandoned warehouse off Route 62 west of the city. It's a dead zone, she'd said. No listed owner, last tied to a shell company that dissolved years ago. If Sentinel Force is active, that's where they're hiding. Daniel had nodded, his jaw tight. The warehouse was a lead, but it was also a trap waiting to be sprung. With his suspension from field duty, he couldn't call in backup, but he wasn't alone. Sarah was in, and so was Clara Evans, a retired K9 trainer who'd worked with Daniel in Cincinnati and owed him a favor. Clara arrived at dusk, a wiry woman in her 60s with a grey braid and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her old K9 partner, Rusty, a grizzled Labrador with a silver muzzle, padded beside her, his eyes sharp despite his age. "Heard you're stirring up trouble, Harper," Clara said, her gravelly voice warm with respect. She carried a duffel of gear, flashlights, a small drone, a body cam she'd used in her training days. Daniel briefed her on Michael Vaughan, Nathan's possible involvement, and the warehouse. "If they're there," he said, "we need proof, something to nail them." Sarah joined them, her auburn hair pulled back, her tablet loaded with the GPS data and vet records linking the collar to Sentinel Force. "I'm recording everything," she said, tapping her phone. "If we get audio or video, it's going straight to my secure drive." The puppies, sensing the tension, clustered around Daniel, Luna nuzzling his hand. He decided to bring Max along, his bold energy a potential asset, and fitted him with a tagged collar for tracking. "Stay close, buddy," he murmured, scratching Max's ears. At 7:03 p.m., under a sky now spitting rain, they arrived at the warehouse, a crumbling relic of concrete and rusted steel, its windows boarded, its lot overgrown with weeds. The air was thick with the scent of oil and decay, a faint glow leaking from a crack in the building's side. Daniel, Clara, Rusty, and Max approached on foot, Sarah monitoring from the van with her tablet and a radio. They moved silently. Daniel's .45 holstered but ready, his shoulder still aching from the attacks. Rusty's nose twitched, his posture alert, while Max mirrored him, ears perked, tail stiff. At the warehouse's side entrance, muffled voices drifted through a broken window. Daniel crouched, signaling Clara to activate her body cam. He pulled a small recorder from his pocket, its red light blinking. The voices were distinct, Michael Vaughan's raspy drawl and Nathan Wells's clipped performative tone. "You screwed this up, Vaughan," Nathan hissed. "Those pups were supposed to be gone, clean, no trace. Now Harper's sniffing around." "They're just dogs," Michael snapped. "Bred for the job, same as always. You want this clean, handle Harper yourself." Daniel's breath caught, his grip tightening on the recorder. Clara's eyes met. Here's her nod grim. They had them, proof of conspiracy, animal cruelty, and intent to harm. But before they could retreat, Max, sensing movement inside, let out a sharp bark. A crate shifted, footsteps pounded, and the warehouse door burst open. Michael, broad and scarred, lunged out, a flashlight in one hand, a knife in the other. Nathan followed, his uniform pristine but his face pale with shock. "Harper!" Michael roared, spotting Daniel. Rusty reacted first, launching at Michael with a guttural growl, knocking the knife free. Max darted in, snapping at Michael's leg, his small teeth sinking into denim. Daniel drew his .45, aiming at Michael. "Drop it, Vaughan, you're done." Nathan hesitated, his hands raised, but his eyes darted toward the warehouse, where crates of equipment, and likely more evidence, sat, exposed. Clara tackled Nathan, her wiry strength surprising him, pinning him to the ground. "Stay down, Wells," she growled, securing his wrists with zip ties from her bag. Michael, bleeding from Rusty's bite, tried to run, but Daniel sprinted after him, tackling him into the wet gravel. The fight was brief. Michael's limp slowed. Him and Daniel's adrenaline outmatched his bulk. He cuffed Michael, his voice low and fierce. "For the puppies, you bastard." Sarah, watching from the van, had recorded it all. Audio, video, the confrontation streamed to her drive. She radioed Daniel, her voice steady. "I've got it. Sending it to Detective Karen Lee now." Karen, a trusted colleague from another division, had agreed to receive evidence off the books, bypassing Nathan's influence. As they secured Michael and Nathan, a crate inside the warehouse caught Daniel's eye, stacked with collars, training vests, and documents marked SF. The puppies, Max included, had been part of a revived Sentinel Force operation, bred for illegal security work, discarded when they became a risk. Max, back at Daniel's side, barked triumphantly, his tail wagging despite the chaos. The rain began to fall harder, washing the gravel clean. Daniel looked at Clara, Rusty, and Max, their bravery a mirror to the puppy's resilience. Sarah emerged from the van, her eyes meeting Daniel's, a shared understanding passing between them. They had proof, but the fight wasn't over. Michael and Nathan were down, but the network they served might still reach. For now, though, the puppies were safe and Daniel felt a surge of hope. Sunny, Luna, Willow, and Max had brought him here, to this moment of truth, and he'd see it through. For them, for Jamie, for the justice Emily would have fought for. The night at the abandoned warehouse off Route 62 in Columbus, Ohio, erupted into chaos as rain lashed the cracked gravel, turning it to mud. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke and oil, the warehouse's interior flickering with the first sparks of a fire set by Michael Vaughn to destroy evidence. Daniel Harper stood in the downpour, his .45 still gripped tightly, his shoulder throbbing from the confrontation. Michael, cuffed and bleeding from Rusty's bite, slumped against the warehouse wall, his arrogance replaced by defeat. Captain Nathan Wells, zip-tied by Clara Evans, sat in the mud, his pristine uniform soiled, his face a mask of shock and resignation. Clara's grizzled Labrador, Rusty, panted heavily, his silver muzzle streaked with dirt, while Max, the chocolate lab pup, stood proudly at Daniel's side, his tagged collar glinting in the rain. Dr. Sarah Mitchell emerged from the van, her auburn hair plastered to her face, her tablet clutched tightly, its screen glowing with the recorded evidence that would change everything. The fire inside the warehouse grew, flames licking at crates stuffed with Sentinel force gear. Collars, training vests, and files marked SF. Daniel's heart pounded as he realized Michael's plan. Burn it all. Erase the proof of their illegal dog-breeding operation and its ties to narcotics and corruption. "We need to move," he shouted, signaling Clara. She hoisted Nathan to his feet, her wiry frame unyielding, while Daniel dragged Michael toward the van. Rusty limped, his rear leg injured from the scuffle, and Clara scooped him up, her face tight with worry. Max, undaunted, darted alongside, his small form a beacon of courage. Sarah met them at the van, her voice steady despite the chaos. "The footage is secure," she said, holding up her phone. "Clara's body cam, my audio, the video of the confrontation. It's all uploaded to Karen Lee's server. She's moving for a warrant now." Detective Karen Lee, a methodical officer with a reputation for integrity, was their lifeline, bypassing Nathan's influence in the precinct. Daniel exhaled, the weight of their success tempered by the fire's roar. "We need those crates," he said, nodding toward the warehouse. "If they burn, we lose half the case." Clara set Rusty in the van, her eyes scanning the flames. "I've got a fire extinguisher in my truck," she said. "We can slow it down." Daniel nodded and they ran back, Max at their heels, his bark sharp with determination. Inside, the heat was suffocating, smoke curling like a living thing. Daniel and Clara sprayed the extinguisher, dousing the flames around a stack of crates. They grabbed what they could, files, a blood-stained vest, another collar with a serial number, before the fire surged, forcing them out. The warehouse groaned, a beam collapsing, but they made it to the van, coughing, their arms laden with evidence. As they regrouped, a new piece of the puzzle emerged. Jamie Carter, the 13-year-old newspaper boy, had followed them, driven by the same courage that led him to snap the watcher's photo. Hidden in the weeds near a nearby industrial lot, he'd recorded Michael dumping evidence hours before the confrontation. His shaky footage, sent anonymously to Karen Lee via his grandmother's old phone, showed Michael tossing black bags into a dumpster, one ripping to reveal a bloodied dog collar and a training vest marked SF. The video, paired with Clara's body cam, Sarah's audio, and the physical evidence, was a net tightening around Michael and Nathan. Back at Daniel's home, the group gathered in the early hours, the puppies a grounding presence. Sonny, now able to scamper a few steps, nuzzled Rusty, who lay bandaged on a towel, his prognosis uncertain but stable. Luna and Willow curled around Max, who panted proudly, his role in the confrontation earning him extra treats. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her tablet open, replaying the footage. "This is ironclad," she said, her voice firm. "Michael's confession, Nathan's complicity, the physical evidence, it ties them to Sentinel Force's revival and the puppies' abuse." Daniel, his shoulder wrapped in fresh bandages, studied the files they'd salvaged. They detailed a breeding program for high-risk security dogs, sold to private firms and cartels, with Nathan skimming profits and Michael running the ground operation. The puppies, Sonny, Max, Luna, Willow, had been deemed defective, too weak or small for training, and dumped to die. "They thought no one would care," Daniel said, his voice low, his eyes on the puppies. "They were wrong." Clara, nursing a coffee, nodded. Rusty knew something was off the moment we got there. These pups, too. They're survivors, just like us. Her voice cracked. Her worry for Rusty evident, but she straightened, her resolve unbroken. Sarah's phone buzzed. Karen Lee. Warrants issued, Karen said, her voice clipped but triumphant. Michael and Nathan are in custody. We're raiding the lot where the kid's video was shot. You did good, Harper, all of you. Daniel hung up, his gaze settling on the puppies. Sonny had climbed into his lap, a small miracle of strength. While Luna chewed his shoelace, Max sprawled beside Willow, their bond a testament to their ordeal. Jamie's courage, Clara's grit, Sarah's unwavering support, Rusty's sacrifice. It had all led here, to a truth that could dismantle a corrupt network, but the cost weighed heavy. Rusty's injuries, the risk to Jamie, the attacks on Daniel, they were scars of a fight not yet finished. Outside, the rain had stopped, the sky clearing to reveal a sliver of moon. Daniel thought of Emily, her love for strays, her belief that every life mattered. The puppies had brought him back to that belief, and to a family he hadn't expected. Sarah, Clara, Jamie, even Rusty and Max. The evidence was their weapon, but the puppies were their heart, a reminder that even the smallest voices could bring down giants. Sarah touched his hand, her eyes soft but fierce. We've got them, Daniel. Now we make sure it sticks. He nodded, Sonny's warmth grounding him. The evidence was secure, the arrests made, but the network behind Sentinel Force might still lurk. For now, though, they'd won a battle, and the puppies were safe. Daniel looked at Max, Luna, Willow, and Sonny, their trust unshaken, and felt a spark of hope. They'd started this together, and they'd finish it. Together. The winter morning in Columbus, Ohio was crisp and clear, the sky a pale blue streaked with wispy clouds, as if the city itself had exhaled after months of tension. Inside Daniel, Harper's Craftsman home, the living room was alive with the joyful chaos of 4 Labrador Retriever puppies, their coats gleaming under the soft glow of a lamp. Sonny, the golden pup, bounded across the rug, his white-patched chest a badge of his miraculous recovery. Max, the chocolate lab, chased Luna, the black pup, their playful barks echoing as they tumbled over a chew toy. Willow, the yellow lab, sat calmly, her gentle eyes watching them with a quiet pride, a guardian of their small pack. Daniel stood by the window, a fresh coffee in hand, his reinstated badge clipped to his belt, a symbol of a name cleared and a purpose renewed. The scars of the fight, physical and emotional, remained, but the puppy's boundless energy was a balm, healing wounds he'd carried for years. The trial of Michael Vaughan and Captain Nathan Wells had been swift, the evidence overwhelming. Clara Evans' body cam footage, Dr. Sarah Mitchell's audio recordings, Jamie Carter's dumpster video, and the physical evidence from the warehouse, collars, bloodied vests, and Sentinel Force files, had woven a case too tight to unravel. Michael, once a swaggering ex-cop, stood silent as charges of animal cruelty, conspiracy, and attempted assault were read. Nathan, his polished facade shattered, faced obstruction of justice and corruption, his role in covering Sentinel Force's illegal dog-breeding operation exposed. The courtroom, packed with officers, reporters, and locals, buzzed with quiet nods of respect as Daniel took the stand, his voice steady, his testimony anchored by the puppy's survival. Outside the courthouse, Daniel had been approached by Linda Torres, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 40s, the new director of Columbus's Animal Crisis Response Unit, a program born from the scandal's fallout. "You're a symbol now, Harper," she'd said, a wry smile on her lips. "Ready to make it official?" The unit, a partnership between the police and local shelters, aimed to protect abused animals and integrate them into community healing programs. Daniel had agreed, not for the title but for the puppies, Sonny, Max, Luna, and Willow, who'd already shown what second chances could do. 3 months had passed since the warehouse fire, and the puppies had transformed. With Sarah's veterinary care and the expertise of Carlos Nguyen, a soft-spoken Vietnamese-American dog behaviorist in his 30s, with a shaved head and a gentle touch, they'd been trained as certified therapy dogs. Carlos, who'd overcome a rough childhood in foster care, had a gift for reading animals. his patience coaxing out their strengths. Sonny, once the frailest, now thrived with sensitive children, his calm presence easing their fears. Max, bold and energetic, bonded with older kids, his playfulness breaking through their walls. Luna, curious and quick, charmed the youngest, her antics sparking laughter. Willow, the quiet leader, gravitated toward those with the deepest trauma, her steady gaze a silent promise of safety. The program paired the dogs with children at the Children's Trauma Center, addressing PTSD, anxiety, and isolation. The results were slow but profound. A girl who hadn't spoken in months whispered to Sonny. A boy with nightmares slept soundly with Luna curled beside him. Daniel, Sarah, and Carlos worked as a team, their evenings often spent at the center, watching the puppies weave miracles. Jamie Carter, now 14, had become a volunteer, his shy demeanor replaced by confidence as he helped care for the dogs, his bond with Luna unbreakable. His grandmother, Mrs. Carter, had moved with him to a safer neighborhood, a modest home near Sarah's clinic, funded by a community grant Daniel quietly secured. Clara Evans, however, hadn't seen the program's launch. A week after the warehouse raid, she'd passed in her sleep, a heart complication from the fire's trauma. Her funeral was small, attended by Daniel, Sarah, Jamie, and a few retired K-9 officers, with Rusty lying quietly by her casket, his silver muzzle low. Daniel had taken Rusty in, the old Labrador now lounging under the oak tree in his backyard, a wise elder to the puppies. Max loved nudging Rusty's tail, coaxing brief chases, while Sonny napped beside him, their bond a quiet tribute to Clara's sacrifice. At a community event at the Children's Hospital, Daniel stood beside a banner reading "Meet the Therapy Heroes," watching the puppies work their magic. Sonny sat patiently as a girl with a scarred arm petted his ears, her smile tentative but real. Max bounded after a ball tossed by two laughing boys. Luna twirled for a toddler's delight, and Willow leaned into a silent teen, her presence a lifeline. Across the crowd, Sarah met Daniel's eyes, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, her smile a shared victory. They'd grown closer, their evenings now filled with coffee on the porch. Rusty and the puppies sprawled nearby, a slow, unspoken bond taking root. Daniel thought of Emily, her love for strays, her belief that kindness was never wasted. The puppies had brought him back to her light and to a family he hadn't expected: Sarah, Jamie, Carlos, Rusty, and the pups. Justice had been served, but the healing they'd sparked was the true triumph. The Sentinel Force network was unraveling, with Karen Lee leading raids on connected sites. But for Daniel, the real fight was here, in the laughter of a child, the wag of a tail, the quiet evenings where loss felt lighter. As the event wound down, Jamie approached, Luna at his side. "Think I'll be a vet," he said, then grinned. "Or maybe a cop like you, the good kind." Daniel chuckled, ruffling his hair. "You're already the good kind, kid." Sarah joined them, handing Daniel a knitted scarf, navy and warm. "Suits you," she said, her eyes soft. He wrapped it around his neck, nodding once, and they stood together, watching the puppies. Sonny yipped, chasing a leaf, and Daniel felt it, a truth Emily had always known. Sometimes hope comes in the form of a broken pup, a brave boy, or a fight for the voiceless. The puppies had saved him as much as he'd saved them, and in their small, fierce hearts, a new chapter was written. One of love, sacrifice, and second chances.